the KMNN studios, this is the Kids Morning News Network.
It's December 13th, 2023, the 347th day of the year. 2024 is coming up fast, everybody. Welcome to KMNN. In the news this morning, 200 countries at a big meeting about climate change have for the first time agreed to start trying to move away from fossil fuels like gasoline and coal. Fossil fuels contribute to global warming. It'll be a gradual change, but the deal aims to reduce emissions or pollution to zero by the year 2050. This group has been meeting for 30 years, and this is the first time they're actually talking about fossil fuels by name. So it's a big deal. Nothing's going to happen overnight, but it's a start. And this time of year, Christmas trees are everywhere. Most of them are grown on these big farms, Christmas tree farms, if you can believe it. Like a big cornfield, I guess, only full of trees. There's a new report that says that these tree farms are helping wildlife and the environment, doing the job, essentially, that a forest would do. And yeah, the trees do get cut down, of course, but on Christmas tree farms, there are always more trees growing and farmers planting new ones all the time. Now, of course, it's not quite the same thing as a forest. For one thing, Christmas tree farms are pretty much all one kind of tree, whereas a forest has a lot of diversity, all different kinds of trees and plants and things. And sometimes Christmas tree farms use chemicals to keep the bugs away. But some scientists say that compared to other uses of land, Christmas tree farms really don't use very many chemicals at all. And they give back a lot in terms of places for animals to live and the way they help clean the air. Now, if only there was a Christmas present farm, that's something I could really get into. So like I said, it's December 13th, and guess whose birthday it is today? Taylor Swift. She was born on this day in 1989. If you see her, say happy birthday for me. And 17 years before Taylor Swift was born, the crew of Apollo 17 headed out for their final exploration on the moon. They were a moon mission. That was back in 1972. It was actually the sixth mission to land on the moon. And they did some pretty cool stuff. It was the longest moon mission, first of all. The three astronauts from Apollo 17 were in space for 12 and a half days and spent about 3 days on the moon itself. Well, two of them did anyway. The third guy stayed up in the command module and circled the moon for 3 days, making sure that everyone was safe and everything was running well. The two astronauts on the moon also went farther away from their spaceship than anyone before or since. See, they brought their own dune buggy with them called the Lunar Roving Vehicle, or LRV. It was basically like a 2-seat electric go-kart, and it actually folded up for the trip. Then when they got to the moon, they pulled it out and unfolded it. Everything about it was made to be super lightweight. The tires weren't even rubber like they are in a car. They were this wire mesh, like round metal screens. And both the front and the back wheels could turn, so the LRV could take really tight corners if it had to. But the LRV was great because the astronauts couldn't really walk very far. They had these big, bulky spacesuits. With the LRV, they could just drive, and they did. They drove more than 4 miles away from their ship and then turned around and came 4 miles back. They went out and explored for all 3 days they were on the moon, and then on this very day, 51 years ago, they parked the LRV for the last time and got back in their spaceship. And that was the very last time any human set foot on the moon. The LRV is still up there, by the way, so if you have a way to get to the moon, you can just hop in and go for a ride. And really, you don't even have to go all that way, because a bunch of the inventions they created or made better for the moon missions are still in our lives even today. For one thing, fireproof fabric, like the things that firefighters wear in their fire suits, those were invented to create spacesuits for the Apollo astronauts to protect them. Also, those crinkly silver space blankets that reflect your body heat, same thing, invented for the Apollo spacesuits. And do you ever crunch on freeze-dried fruit? Or go on a camping trip where you have one of these meals you add hot water to and mix it up and it rehydrates. That's freeze-dried food. And guess what? I mean, it wasn't invented for the Apollo missions, but the Apollo missions made it much better because the astronauts needed a lot of food for those 12 and a half days. If it wasn't for Apollo missions, freeze-dried food wouldn't be nearly as good. And if you've ever had astronaut ice cream, you know that it is some tasty stuff. Although, one thing I found out is that the astronaut ice cream wasn't actually on the space missions. That's just for us here on Earth. So that was 51 years ago. Nobody's been back to the moon since, but that may change pretty soon. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. Okay, it's riddle time. I'm doing a riddle a day. I'm trying to make them harder as the week goes along. Yesterday's riddle, if you were listening, was what can you put in a bucket to make it weigh less? What can you put in a bucket to make it weigh less? The answer? Holes. You put holes in a bucket and it weighs less and it dumps out everything that's inside of it. Doesn't work as well, but it does weigh less. Okay, here's today's riddle. The Wednesday riddle, I'll give you the answer tomorrow, but it should be a little bit more challenging. You ready? Here it is. You walk into a dark room. You're holding a match. You see a kerosene lamp. That's a lamp that has a flame in it. A candle and a fireplace. Which one do you light first? You walk into a dark room. You're holding a match. You see a kerosene lamp, a candle, and a fireplace. Which one do you light first? I'll give you the answer tomorrow.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6.
So December 13th, this is the day that the Apollo 17 astronauts took their last drive on the moon, and no one has been back there since. That was back in 1972. But people are trying to get back there, and in particular, NASA, the space agency, says it wants to put people back on the moon by 2025. That's just 2 years away. It's called the Artemis program. Like Apollo was the program back in the day, this is the Artemis program. NASA wants to eventually have a base on the moon called Gateway, and that could be a stop on a trip to Mars. I don't know about you, but I know a couple of kids who would love to be on that trip to Mars. First, we have to get to the moon. And last year, December 2022, the first Artemis blasted off. It circled the moon, and then it splashed down in the Pacific Ocean. It carried a crew of 3. Helga, Zohar, and Commander Munikin Campos? Yeah, that's right. Helga, Zohar, and Commander Munikin Campos. They weren't real people. They were mannequins. Basically, big dolls. But they had sensors in them to study how the flight might affect a real human. The second Artemis is scheduled for next year, 2024, right around the corner. And it will have real people on board. But it won't land on the moon. It'll just fly around it and then come back to Earth. The cool thing is, since the mission will fly all the way around the moon, on the other side, it may turn out to be the furthest away from Earth that people have ever been. Very cool. Then the moon landing is supposed to happen with Artemis 3, which was originally scheduled for 2025. So why are we sending rockets to the moon twice before we even land? Well, it's a really big deal to get to the moon, and we have to make sure everything works, and that the astronauts will be safe. That's how the Apollo program worked. Astronauts didn't actually land on the moon until Apollo 11. So if Artemis 3 lands, that's pretty speedy by comparison. And it's a good thing they're taking their time, because when Artemis 1 splashed down last year, they found that some things hadn't quite worked the way they expected. So that means they have to be reworked and adjusted before people go up in Artemis. And all that reworking and adjusting is why Artemis 3, which was scheduled to land on the moon just 2 years from now, looks like it's going to be late. We don't know how much yet, Some scientists say it could be years late. How many years, we don't know yet. But NASA isn't the only group with plans to land on the moon. The space agency in China is also scheduling a stop on our little friend in 2030. So, the astronauts from Artemis may have company.
The Eagle has landed.
Now let's talk about what the weather's going to do today. It looks pretty dry for a lot of the country, except if you're in Texas or Oklahoma or South Florida, and then you could see some rain. And in the southern part of the Rocky Mountains, higher up, you might see some snow or ice. Also northern New York, northern New England. Looks like it'll be in the high 70-degree area in the far southern parts of the country, like the little tippy tips of Florida and Texas. But then it gets cooler and cooler until you go all the way up north in places like Minnesota, Maine, and New Hampshire. It won't even hit 30. Could also get a little breezy up there in the northeast. Other than that, looks like the weather should be pretty calm just about everywhere. All right, I like poems. I like starting my day with a poem, so I'm going to close out with a poem today. We've been talking a lot about the moon, so that's what today's poem is about. This is called The Crescent Moon, and it's by Amy Lowell. Slipping softly through the sky, little horned happy moon, can you hear me up so high? Will you come down soon? On my nursery windowsill, will you stay your steady flight, and then float away with me through the summer night? Brushing over tops of trees, playing hide and seek with stars, peeping up through shiny clouds at Jupiter or Mars. I shall fill my lap with roses, gathered in the Milky Way, all to carry home to Mother. Oh, what she will say! Little rocking, sailing moon, do you hear me shout, ahoy! Just a little nearer, moon, to please a little boy. Yeah, taking a ride on the moon. That'd be cool. That's the show. That's the news for this morning. Thanks for listening. I'll see you tomorrow from the KMNN Newsroom. This is Alex, signing off.